Essay Prompt 1. When attempting to understand why a long-distance athlete would consume carbohydrates during the course of a run, it is first imperative that we understand what carbohydrates are used for. Carbohydrates are the main fuel source for glycolysis. Now, glycolysis is one of your 4 energy systems in your body. It's the second fastest to respond. The main purpose of glycolysis is not to produce large volumes of ATP. Glycolysis only really produces 2 ATP total. But its big contribution is it creates 2 molecules of pyruvate. Pyruvate is a 3-carbon molecule that can be broken down further into what is called acetyl-CoA. Now, acetyl-CoA is important because it allows us to get into the third energy system. This is the Krebs cycle. Now, Krebs cycle also does not produce a whole lot of ATP, only produces 1 ATP per rotation. But what it does do is per rotation, it produces a total of 3 NADH and 1 FADH2. Now, glycolysis produces 2 pyruvate. So that means you're going to get a total of 6 NADH and 2 FADH2. Now, those molecules by themselves don't really do anything, but that's when your 4th and final energy system, your electron transport chain, comes into play. Now, the electron transport chain is a set of 3 proteins that function as pumps, and then a final one that is kind of a tube with a little rotating dial at the bottom. That final one is called ATP synthase. So what these pumps do is they're going to accept either FADH2 or NADH, and they are going to use the power of an electron carried by those molecules to push hydrogens into the intermembranal space and create a concentration gradient of high hydrogen concentration and low hydrogen concentration. So what's going to happen is the NADH is going to come in at your first of the 3 pumps, and it's going to push out 4 hydrogens. It has the electron has more work it can do, so it moves from the first pump to the second pump. The second pump is going to push out 4 more hydrogens into that intermembranal space. There's still a little bit more work that the electron can do, so it moves to the third and the final pump, and it will push out only 2 hydrogens there. Now, FADH2 is going to function very similarly, but instead of coming in at the first pump, it comes in at the second pump. When it comes in at the second pump, it pushes out the same 4 hydrogens, and that electron can still do a little bit of work, so it moves to the final, the third pump, and pushes out the same 2 that NADH did as well. So there's this big old set of hydrogen molecules just sitting up here. There's like no hydrogen down here. But that really large protein that I mentioned, there was like the tube with a little rotating dial at the bottom, ATP synthase, it will take the hydrogens in and move them from high concentration to low concentration. The thing that ATP synthase does is every time 4 hydrogens move through, it creates 1 ATP. And this is where you get the bulk of your energy for everything inside of your body. But none of this happens if glucose or carbohydrates don't turn into glucose, and glucose doesn't turn into pyruvate or acetyl-CoA to run this whole system. So that's why carbs are so important. The thing is, carbs aren't the only source for acetyl-CoA. The other source you can do is through fats, or particularly through ketones. Ketones can be broken down into 2-carbon acetyl-CoA and run through the Krebs cycle to produce those same molecules. And the issue is you don't have a ton of fat inside of a long-distance runner. Most long-distance runners are incredibly lean with very low body fat, so they don't have a whole lot of lipids and a lot of fats that they can break down. So then the majority, 80% and more of the acetyl-CoA that they need has to come from carbohydrate breakdown in glycolysis. The next issue that we're presented with, or the next reason that we're presented with to ingest carbohydrates during a run, is because the body only stores about 200 grams of glucose at any one time. Now, glucose is stored inside of your skeletal muscle in the form of glycogen, and there's only about 200 grams of that in the body at any one time again. So when a runner, especially when long distance runners go out and do like however long, if it's a marathon for like 26 miles, or for like these individuals from 50 to 100 miles, they're going to end up depleting the entirety of their glucose or their glycogen stores, and that's when they're going to hit that wall that you see for like marathon runners in the last quarter of the race, when they just can't keep going anymore. It's because they've run out of glucose to run through glycolysis to produce acetyl-CoA. That's why we want our athletes to eat carbohydrates during the run. What it's going to do is it's going to act as an artificial glucose store, because it's going to directly put glucose into the body, and it's going to be a very quick way to get glucose to run through glycolysis to keep producing tons of ATP. It's the main reason that we would like to have our athletes eating carbohydrates during the run. It's going to increase the distance that they can run before they hit that wall where they've run out of glucose, or they've run out of like their glycogen stores to be able to run.